In this video, I'm going to be talking with Roy Moore, Salesforce architect and user group leader, about some of the common questions people have when they start their Salesforce certification journey. I hope you find it useful.
So another common question that comes up a lot is when people start studying, they want to know how much time do they actually need to study for the actual certification exam. So I'm here with Roy Moore, and Roy, what would you answer when people ask you that question?
13 hours. That's how long you need to prepare for all the Salesforce certifications.
Really? 13 hours? Okay, that's interesting.
No, not really. I'm kidding. It totally depends.
Okay,
I do get that
so
question a lot, though. People ask me how long, and it just depends. But we can explain. We can talk about why it depends.
okay. So what does it actually depend on?
Well, it depends on a few things. It depends on your experience. How long have you been in Salesforce? It depends on what you've been doing in Salesforce. It depends on uh, what level of Salesforce org that you've been working on. If it's less than enterprise, then there are sections of Salesforce you've never been exposed to because it's not unlocked for an org that's under the enterprise level. Um, it depends on how healthy your org is. Did you help stand it up? Did you build it from scratch, or have you just been resetting passwords the time that you've been working on Salesforce? It's just so many factors. So this is my rubric I came up with. It's very loose. It's not scientific or anything. It's just my humble opinion is that if yesterday you said what's Salesforce, then you probably need about 200 hours of prep time to get ready for your first certification. If you've been Salesforcing for a year, maybe in an admin role, a junior admin role, maybe 80 hours of prep time is enough. 2 years, 40 hours, 3 years, 20 hours. That's again a very loose rubric. There are so many pieces that could influence this, but assuming this is correct, there is a little quiz we could look at together. Pop quiz. Susan, she's been at her company for 2 years as a Salesforce admin, and she's been prepping for admin cert. She decided she can study for an hour a day, Monday through Friday, and 5 hours on the weekend. When should Susan schedule her exam? So going back to that key from before, if she can study an hour a day on the weekdays and 5 hours on the weekends, and she's been Salesforcing for 2 years, what would you think that would mean for her how long she needs to put off the exam for?
Well, I think this is, let's just go back and look at the question again. I think this is really useful, and people should spend the time to just step through it and think about some of the factors that Roy has mentioned. So, um, so Susan has been at her company for 2 years, and so then it's important, well, what has she actually been doing? So she's been a Salesforce admin for 2 years. Now she's prepping for an admin cert. So already we know that she's got 2 years of experience on the job, actually working with Salesforce. And then now the next question is, well, how much time does she actually have to study? So she's decided she's got 1 hour a day, and that's Monday through Friday, and 5 hours on the weekend. So now we know how many hours, we know what her prior experience is, and that really gives some inputs into allowing her to think about when she could, how much time does she need, and when should she schedule her exam.
And the answer that you'll come up with if you just rely on the rubric before is 4 weeks. But this is really a trick question because I said 4 weeks, give or take 6 months as a joke, and the second answer is no clue. So those are the two answers, and it comes down to the next slide. The next slide tells us why it depends, and we can go through these questions. Did she build the org or did she inherit it? Has she been doing Salesforce admin full time, half time, quarter time? Is she a solo admin or is she on a team? Is her org healthy or is it a mess? How customized is it? How many users and stakeholders? What edition of Salesforce? If it's less than enterprise, then there's stuff she's never touched before. Did she bring any transferable skills to the role? Has she made any significant enhancement, or has she just been resetting passwords for the last 2 years? So all this comes back to it depends.
Right. And I think one of the important points out of this is that Salesforce recommend that you have a certain amount of on-the-job experience as well as studying through the topics. So putting those two things together, and then, as Roy has suggested here, what when you actually dig into what has she been doing, um, then that will also factor into how much knowledge she has and how that can actually be combined with the theoretical sort of study of combining the knowledge and experience together, and that's going to put you in the best position to be able to actually answer the Salesforce certification questions, which are going to be testing your knowledge, giving you different options and asking you to pick. Sometimes it's even you're picking the best option when there are multiple correct options. So when you look at all of these different questions and what type of experience you have, that really will determine how well are you going to be able to answer those types of questions.
If Susan has been a full-time Salesforce admin for 2 years, she helped stand up an enterprise-level org, if she's worked hard to maintain and keep enhancing the org using Salesforce best practices, if she's been exploring the yearly release notes 3 times a year, if she's been regularly attending her local community group and being engaged in that and actively learning on Trailhead, then 4 weeks very well might be enough for her to get ready for her certification.
And I think what's interesting on this slide and what Roy has mentioned is that it's more, there are other things that you could be doing to putting yourself in the position where you're ready to say yes, I should be admin certified or certified in any of the areas. So let's look at some of the points that are mentioned here. An enterprise level org. So obviously, working in an org where you've got a handful of users versus having hundreds of users is totally different, and you're going to have different challenges, and you're going to be working on different types of solutions. Then the next point that Roy has mentioned here is working hard to maintain, keep enhancing the org using Salesforce best practices. So, again, coming up with your own solutions versus maybe going out to the community, doing research, looking at what Salesforce suggests when you have to come up with a solution. That's going to distinguish yourself as well. Then the next one is exploring the release notes. So the release notes, obviously, they're coming out 3 times a year. There's a lot of information in them, but it's very important to stay on top of them and to know, we mentioned flow before. So knowing, and that was a focus on one of the recent updates to the admin exam, where they've put more emphasis on process automation and in particular flows. So keeping up with, what's going on with workflow versus process builder versus flows, and what are the capabilities of those tools. And then the last one, attending your local community group, actively learning on Trailhead. That's all the community involvement and actually working with other people, and just having that interaction can help you reinforce your own learning versus just doing it all by yourself.
Absolutely. A lot of this is about saw sharpening. It's about intentionally carving out time to take what you know and keep it fresh so it doesn't get rusty as it gets updated in releases and whatnot. You keep it up to date in your mind, and you get exposure to new things on Trailhead that maybe your org doesn't have a need for right now. But just getting that exposure could be helpful, because I've had it happen a dozen times where my company wanted to do something, and I had this thought, I think there's a trail about that. I believe I did one a few months ago or a year ago, and has allowed me to go find data about that feature. So absolutely, we have to be saw sharpeners as we approach our certifications and our professional careers.
So if we're going to, if you haven't already got it, how much time do you need? Well, it really depends. So Roy, you've come up with a bit of a formula to help people decide on when they actually should schedule their exam date.
Yes, and this is basic reverse engineering. Basically, you take today's date and you take the number of hours that you need to study, and you take the hours per week that you can study. You do the math on that. In this example, let's say you need 60 hours to get ready for your exam and that you can study for 15 hours a week. Well, 60 divided by 15 is 4. That's 4 weeks. You take the date, you add 4 weeks to it, and that's your exam date.
I think this is really helpful for people just to actually break it down and actually have some sort of guidance. And obviously you can adjust this, but just actually taking the time to think through how many hours, roughly do you think you need, based on all of the factors that we talked about before, and then how many hours do you actually have? And it's easy to overestimate that. So I'd be conservative on the actual hours per week that you have, and then coming up with that date. And that date is going to give you a goal to work towards. I think it's really important to set a goal, and otherwise you might find yourself just just pushing that date out and out, because it is easy to reschedule.
Don't tell them that part. Um, you're absolutely right. Without without figuring out a goal of like, well, I need to study this many hours, and I think I can study this many hours a week. I mean, and it could be 80 hours that you need to study, and 10 hours a week that you can study. It could be 20 hours you need to study, and 5 hours a week you can study. I mean, it whatever it is, you do that so you get that exam date. But like you said, Martin, the exam date is a goal, and if you don't set that, unless you're extremely disciplined, most of us will say maybe next week, maybe next week, maybe next week, maybe next week, maybe, and we'll just push it for months and months and months. But once you schedule that exam and you say, okay, I have committed, I've set the date, I've scheduled it, I need to put in my time studying, it will help you to actually fulfill that goal in a timely manner.